Hey there, come a little closer to the fire with me. I want to tell you a darker truth tonight, the kind that hides in plain sight, not in the flash of a sword, not in a chest of gold, but in the quiet hours when a ship is nothing but wood and water and human breath. Picture this: winter sea spray, turning to a thin, glassy crust on the rails. A lantern allowed only in certain hands, its flame guarded like a secret. 100 men trying to sleep in a space that never quite dries, never quite warms, and a single forbidden spark that could erase the entire floating world in minutes. If that sounds like the sort of story you want to drift into, take a second to like the video and subscribe. It helps these slow, candle-lit nights find the people who need them. Now, let your shoulders drop, let your jaw loosen, just a touch. Feel the soft pull of gravity through your arms, through your hands, down into your lap. Breathe in, slow and quiet, and breathe out, even slower. The room around us is dim. The fireplace gives off a gentle pulse of heat, and the candles add their small halos of light. Outside this room, the world can keep its noise. In here, we can step into another kind of darkness, one that does not chase you. It simply surrounds you, like a blanket. Tonight, we are going aboard a wooden sailing ship in winter. The year might be 1680 or 1720 or any cold season in that long age when men crossed oceans under sail. I say might because the details shift depending on whose journal survived, whose ink did not blur with salt. Some scholars argue for 1 decade, some for another. But the feeling stays steady. Cold northern water, wind that threads itself through rigging like fingers through hair, and a ship that creaks as if it is thinking. We begin above, on the deck, because I want you to feel the boundary between open winter and the enclosed wooden world. Imagine stepping out into the night. Your boots find planks that are slick with cold. Not quite ice, but close enough that your body tenses anyway. The ship lifts and falls under you, gentle at first, then more pronounced, like a slow animal shifting its weight. A wave strikes the hull. The sound comes up through the timber, a deep thump followed by a long sigh as the water slides away. At first, you hear every impact. Then, after days, after weeks, the sound becomes a kind of ocean breathing. Spray rises and breaks, and in winter it can freeze where it lands. A thin white crust forms on rope and rail. A world made of salt and cold is trying, patiently, to claim the ship. And still, the ship keeps moving. Below the deck is where sleep happens. This is not a story of cannon fire, though cannons are there. Not a story of treasure, though men might whisper of it. It is simply about rest, about what people do when they need to close their eyes and they cannot make the world kind. Because warmth, the simplest kindness, is missing. There is no hearth aboard a wooden ship. There is no stove for the common men to gather around when the cold gets into their bones. The ship is a wooden shell, sealed with pitch and laced with rope and heavy with stored oil, not to mention the powder that some ships carry like a sleeping thunderstorm in their belly. Fire is not a comfort on a ship like this. Fire is a doom. So the rule is simple, absolute, not a suggestion, not a guideline you can bend when you are tired. No open flame, except in the few places and moments that have been allowed, and even those allowances vanish when the weather turns sharp. You can feel how that rule shapes everything, can't you? It changes how people eat, because hot food depends on controlled flame. It changes how people see, because even light is heat, and heat is risk. It changes how people behave, because a spark is not a private mistake. A spark belongs to everyone. It threatens everyone. And so the fear of fire becomes a kind of shared prayer. Tonight, let's follow one winter night, slowly, from the perspective of the men who lived it. You may call them sailors. You may call some of them pirates. In truth, In the dark below deck, with the cold pressing in and the ship moving under you, those labels blur. A body needs sleep, no matter what flag is flying above. It begins with the end of work. The sky is black, the watch changes, voices soften, boots thud less often. The wind still tugs at the rigging, and the sea still speaks against the hull, but the human noise begins to thin, like smoke drifting away from a snuffed candle. A man comes down the ladder. He pauses at the hatch, the way you might pause at the edge of a dark room, letting your eyes adjust. But his eyes will not adjust much. Down here, darkness is not a momentary condition. It is a policy. Some ships allow lanterns only to specific men. A dispenser, perhaps, moving through with measured steps. Flame, shielded by glass and metal. A circle of light that slides along the beams and then moves on, leaving the world behind it as black as before. So most men learn the ship by touch. A palm on a beam, fingers on a line, a shoulder brushing canvas. They know where to duck because their skull has learned the height of the beams. They know where the cannons are because the air around cold iron feels different, a faint chill that reaches you before you touch it. The gun deck is where most of them sleep. It is a strange thing, sleeping among weapons. Cannons sit there like dark animals, iron bodies on wooden carriages. In battle, they are thunder. At night, they are simply cold, massive cold. Heat sinks that drink warmth from anything that comes near. Between those guns, where there must be space for crews to work if the world turns violent, the hammocks will hang. First, the men retrieve their bedding. In the storage netting, or in designated stowage places, there are bundles rolled tight in the morning. Each bundle is a man's hammock, his small private territory. It is canvas and rope and, if he is lucky, a heavy wool mattress and a wool coverlet. If he is unlucky, the wool is thin, patched, damp. He lifts the roll. It is heavier than you expect, because damp fabric carries water the way a sponge carries a secret. His arms ache. He shifts the weight, finds a grip. The roll smells of wool and salt and the faint sourness of long use. He walks carefully, because the ship is never still. Each step is a negotiation. The plank tilts, his knee bends, his body compensates. Around him, other men do the same. The gun deck begins to change. Hooks in the beams wait overhead. A man reaches up, fingers numb, and loops the hammock's ends onto the points that have been assigned to him. There is order even in this. Numbers, stations, a place for each body, measured so many inches from the next. Close enough that you could touch your neighbor if you stretched a hand. Close enough that privacy becomes a strange illusion made from fabric walls. The hammocks go up one by one. Ropes creak under weight. The beams answer with their own low complaining sound. And then, gradually, the men begin to climb in. There is a technique to it. A hammock can roll. It can twist. A careless movement can spill you onto the deck with a thump. And nobody wants that kind of noise in the dark. So he turns his body sideways. He places one hand on the canvas, testing tension. He lowers his weight. Slow, controlled, letting the hammock accept him. The canvas wraps up the sides of his hips, his shoulders. It holds him. It is, oddly, a kind of embrace. And the ship's motion does the rest. The hammock begins to sway, almost immediately, because everything sways. The hull rolls. The beams shift. The hammock becomes a pendulum, and the pendulum finds a rhythm. It is not warmth, but it is a kind of mercy. Because the hammock lifts him off the deck. If he slept on the planks, cold would pour into him through contact. The hammock keeps him away from that, but the hammock creates another problem. Air moves beneath him, cold air. It flows under the canvas, under his body, and it tries to steal the warmth he has left. This is the beginning of the ship's winter truth. Heat cannot be made. It can only be kept. So now, in the dim gun deck, he begins the ritual of keeping. He wears what he wore on watch: wool stockings, heavy breeches, a wool jacket if he has one. He does not undress, because undressing would mean a moment of exposure, skin offered to the cold, a sudden loss he might not recover from easily. He adjusts his clothing in small ways, pulls the jacket closed, tucks fabric at the wrist, at the neck, closing gaps. Then he lays down his mattress, if he has one, a dense wool flock thing, heavy and lumpy. It blocks the air's flow beneath him. It is insulation in the simplest form, trapped air that cannot move. Over that he draws the coverlet, a heavy wool blanket, weighty enough that it drapes and seals, pressing down like a calm hand. It is never truly dry, but wool, unlike many cloths, still holds warmth when damp. Not magic, really, fiber and air, and the way wool traps pockets. But to the men, it is simply what works. He pulls it up to the chin. He tucks it around his shoulders, careful, as if he is closing a door against wind. Some men pull it over their heads, leaving a small gap for breath. Others cannot bear that, the humid cave of their own exhale. Either way, the air inside becomes warmer than the air outside. Not by much, just enough. You can feel how small the margins are, can't you? Degrees, inches, tiny choices. A gap left open, a blanket not tucked. The cold is patient. It does not need drama. It only needs time. Around him, the gun deck settles into its night shape. Hammocks sway in rows. The men inside become lumps and shadows. A whisper becomes softer. A cough becomes muffled. The ship's voice rises. The groan of beams, the creak of joints, the slap of water outside. And somewhere below, deeper than sight, there is another sound, steady and important. The bilge pump. Clank, gurgle, clank, gurgle. Like a heart that must keep beating for the body to survive. Men fall asleep to that sound. You might think it would keep you awake. At first, it would. But the human mind does something kind. When it cannot change the world, it learns what is normal. It files the sound away. It becomes background, like rain on a roof. It becomes reassurance. Someone is working. The ship is staying afloat. And in the hammock, rocked by the rolling world, the man lets his eyes close. Not fully, at once. Sleep arrives in pieces. A long breath, a shorter one. The jaw unclenches, another fraction. The hands find warmth under armpits, or tucked against the belly, or hidden under wool. He curls slightly, reducing the surface he offers to the cold. The canvas supports that shape, cradling his knees toward his chest, if he chooses. And sometimes, in that last thin hour before sleep takes them, a man will think of fire anyway. Not flames, not the bright, cheerful kind you can hold your hands near. He thinks of the idea of it, the memory of it. A kitchen hearth back on land, a small orange glow in a tavern, the way candle smoke curls and leaves a faint soot on the ceiling like dark dust. Down here, even memory feels risky, because memory can make you long for things you cannot have. You can sense the ship's caution everywhere. The lantern glass is kept clean, wiped until it is almost invisible. The wick is trimmed small. The oil is measured. And when the lantern is carried past the gun lockers, past the sealed barrels and their powdery contents, men hold their breath without meaning to. That powder is like dry black sand, like crushed charcoal, like the darkest kind of clay. It sits there quietly in the dark, waiting to become sound and heat and ruin if anyone makes a mistake. So the lantern passes, and the men let the darkness return. They listen, instead, the drip of condensation falling from a beam, slow, steady, as if the ship is counting time. The faint scrape of a rat somewhere, not always, but often enough that you cannot pretend it is imagination. The distant footsteps of the watch above, muffled by planks, turning into a soft rhythm that says, someone is awake for you. Someone is awake so you can be asleep. It is debated how many ships truly held to the rules, and how often men cheated with a hidden ember, a little pipe lit in secret, a warm coal wrapped in cloth. Some accounts insist it happened. Other accounts swear it did not. But even the rumor is enough to show the mood. When warmth is scarce, the mind begins to bargain. It begins to whisper, just this once. And still, most nights, they obey. Because the ocean does not forgive. Because a ship has only so many planks between itself and the deep. Because everyone knows the stories, the ones told in murmurs, the ones that end in a sudden glare of light, a hiss, then a roaring that eats wood faster than any mouth, a catastrophe that turns a crowded deck into open sea, a collapse so complete that it feels cyclical, like the world resetting itself in salt and darkness. So they keep their small warmth the hard way, by layering cloth, by curling inward, by breathing slow, and letting the hammock rock them as gently as a mother's hand. Outside, the winter sea moves on. Inside, the gun deck becomes a dim hive of breathing. And somewhere in that steady motion, in that darkness that is almost a blanket, we can begin to understand the first and greatest rule of this night. No fire. Only what you can keep. Only what you can share. Only what you can endure, softly, until morning. The strange thing is, once you have been rocked like that for a while, your body starts to trust it. A hammock teaches you to surrender, not in a heroic way, in a practical way. It says, stop fighting the motion, because the motion is not yours to control. Let it carry you. So the man drifts. He is not alone in his drifting. 100 small worlds sway in parallel. Canvas cocoons in a dark wooden chamber. If you were here with me, if you stood very still and listened, you could hear the different kinds of sleep, the deep, heavy breathing of someone who drops fast, like a stone into water, the thin, careful breathing of someone who is cold, who is trying to decide whether it is safer to wake up and move or safer to stay still. The occasional whisper, not words exactly, more like a mouth remember. Above, the ship keeps moving through winter, and the cold keeps working. Cold is a craftsman. It does not rush. It finds cracks the way water finds cracks. It slides into seams. It settles around ankles. It creeps along the ribs. It presses against ears and fingertips, those little outposts of the body, and it makes them ache first. As if to announce its arrival, the men have learned the countercraft. They do not waste heat. They do not stretch out like comfortable people. They fold. They tuck. They keep their hands close to organs that matter. They turn their faces away from drafts. And yet, there are moments in the night when even the best ritual fails. A gust hits the ship with a new angle, and the cold air shifts, pouring down a hatchway or through a gap in planking you did not notice until now. A man wakes, not fully, but enough to register the change. His eyes open to blackness. His mind, half asleep, tries to understand where he is. That is another winter truth of life at sea. Disorientation. On land, your body knows which way is down. At sea, down is always changing its mind. The hammock swings, the deck tilts, and your inner ear does its quiet math all night long. Some men get used to it, some never do. They lie awake listening to the ocean's arguments, as if the ship might suddenly decide to roll over and not roll back. When the cold wakes him like that, the man does not sit up all at once. He has learned better. A sudden movement can flip the hammock or knock the blanket loose. So he moves in small increments. A shoulder shifts. A knee draws up closer. He pulls the coverlet tighter at the neck, sealing the gap where warmth escapes like breath from a loose-lipped bottle. The wool is damp. The dampness has its own chill, but it is still better than air. He listens. Clank, gurgle, clank, gurgle. The pump continues its patient work. Somewhere, a sailor coughs. The cough is thick, wet. Winter at sea has a way of turning small colds into lingering companions. There is no easy drying of clothes. There is no sunlit room where you can sit and steam yourself warm. The ship is damp by nature. Water is always arriving, even when you are not taking waves over the bow. It arrives as spray, as condensation, as the breath of 100 bodies meeting cold air and turning into a fine, invisible rain. It settles on beams. It beads on rope. It softens the canvas. And it can soften the mind, too. I've always found it strange how quickly a person's sense of time blurs in a place like this. Days become watches. Weeks become a pattern of chores and meals and sleep. The calendar you carried aboard becomes less important than the feel of your hands, the state of your gums, the taste of your water. Some men call it the sea stealing memory. That might be too poetic, too dramatic. But there is something real behind it. When every day is the same narrow corridor of cold and motion, the mind stops labeling. It stops storing. It slides toward a simpler state. Survive this hour, then the next. And so in the hammocks, dreams can become confused. A man might dream of a hearth and wake with the taste of smoke in his mouth, only to find it is only the sour tang of damp wood and old tar. Another might dream of land, of dust on a road, of clay beneath fingernails from digging a garden, and wake to the reality of salt crust on rope and the constant wet. That contrast can hurt if you let it. So most men learn another skill, softness. They learn to let thoughts come and go without grabbing them. If a memory arrives, they do not wrestle it into shape. They let it drift away like a scrap of fog. It is the only way to stay sane in a world that refuses comfort. And yet, comfort tries to appear in strange forms. Sometimes, it is simply another person's presence, close enough that you can hear him breathing. A hammock is not a wall. You can sense the bodies around you. You can feel their heat, faint but real, as if the air between canvas bundles has been warmed by human life. On some ships, men are assigned in pairs to share one hammock at different times, a practice called hot bunking. One man lies down as another gets up. The fabric never cools fully. It is not intimacy. It is economy, but it creates a strange continuity of warmth, a small rebellion against winter. Even when each man has his own hammock, the closeness creates something similar, a shared microclimate, a thin layer of air, made less cruel by many breaths. And still, rules hold. No flame on the gun deck, no candle tucked by a pillow, no pipe glowing red in the dark, because everyone knows what sits nearby. Not just powder in barrels, but loose grains of it, dust that can escape and drift, settling in seams like the darkest kind of dirt. You do not see it easily, but it is there. It gathers in corners. It clings to fingers. It stains cloth. It is a reminder that a ship can be destroyed by something as small as a spark the size of a firefly. Now, let's speak quietly about the places where fire is allowed, because the ship does have food, and food, most nights, is warm in some way. Men will do almost anything for warm food in winter. It is not just taste, it is heat you can swallow. On many ships, the galley is set apart, a special space designed to contain flame. Sometimes it is built with brick or stone, a kind of artificial hearth sitting inside a wooden body. Sometimes it is surrounded by sand, kept ready in tubs, because sand is the quickest way to smother a fire before it becomes a creature with teeth. The cook tends the fire like a priest tends an altar, careful and watchful. The pot swings on its gimbals so it can stay level when the sea tries to tip it. The lid stays tight, the grease is wiped, the coals are counted. Even so, the smell of that place carries through the ship. It rides the air. It finds men in their hammocks and makes their stomachs tighten with longing. Warm broth, peas boiled soft, salt beef, if there is any, tough but filling, hardtack dipped until it stops trying to break teeth. When the galley is active, the ship feels almost like a living thing with a heart. You can sense warmth rising, faintly, through planks. Not enough to save you, but enough to remind you that heat still exists in the world. In winter storms, though, even that heart can be silenced. If waves are breaking over the deck, if the ship is pitching hard, the cook may be ordered to douse the fire. Safety first, survival first. Hunger can be endured longer than flame can be controlled. So there are nights when no one eats warm food at all, nights when the galley is dark, nights when the only warmth is what you carried into the hammock. Those nights are the hardest. And those nights are when temptation whispers the loudest. You can imagine it, can't you? A man with numb fingers, a man whose teeth are chattering in spite of himself, thinking, I know a way, just a tiny glow, just a breath of warmth. Sometimes it is a pipe, sometimes it is a candle stub, saved from a port visit. Sometimes it is a little lantern, stolen or borrowed, hidden under a coat. This is where the darker part of the story lives, not in monsters. In ordinary need, tonight, on our ship, the temptation belongs to a young sailor with a raw cough and a proud streak. He has been at sea long enough to know the rules, but not long enough to feel them in his bones. He believes he can cheat the cold and keep everyone safe at the same time. He waits until the lantern has passed, until the watch above has settled into its steady pacing, until the bilge pump's rhythm feels like it has swallowed all other sound. Then he slides a hand into his pocket. You can almost feel the carefulness of it, the slow fingers, the way he tries not to rustle cloth, the way he holds his breath, as if breath itself might betray him. What he brings out is small, a flint and steel, wrapped in rag to keep it from clinking, and a twist of dried cord meant to catch spark. Maybe he means only to light it, to hold it for a second, to warm his hands, then snuff it in his fist. Maybe he means to share it with a friend, just one pull of warmth between them. People make plans like that when they are desperate. They tell themselves they will be careful. He angles his body in the hammock so the blanket forms a little tent. Inside that tent, the air is warmer and close, thick with his own breath. He strikes the steel, softly, a small click. Nothing happens. He tries again, slower, click. A spark leaps, tiny and bright, and for a heartbeat it is beautiful. Then it lands on the cord and the cord darkens, a faint orange point appearing like the eye of a sleepy animal. The glow is so small it barely counts as light, but the glow is light all the same. And in the gun deck, light is a shout. Across the aisle, a man's eyes open, not because he saw it clearly, but because the mind senses change, a flicker, a wrongness, a memory of danger. He turns his head. He sees the faint orange point under the blanket tent. His stomach drops. For a second, he cannot speak. Fear makes the tongue heavy. Then the word comes out anyway, low and sharp. No, not yelled, not screamed, just no. That single syllable travels farther than you would expect, because the deck is so quiet. Another hammock sways. Another man wakes. Someone sits up, blanket slipping, and the movement sends a chain reaction of swaying through the canvas forest, like grass stirred by wind. The young sailor freezes. The glow trembles. His hand hesitates between snuffing it and hiding it. In that hesitation, the glow brightens a fraction, and then something else happens, something small and terrifying. A grain of powder, invisible, sitting in a seam of cloth or wood, catches that heat and fizzles. Not a flame, not an explosion, just a tiny hiss like breath escaping. But the sound is enough to turn fear into action. The older men move fast, but not frantic. They have learned how to be quick without making chaos. A hand reaches in, clamps over the glowing cord, smothering it. Another hand yanks the blanket away, exposing the young sailor's face in the darkness. A third hand grabs his wrist. There is a moment of stillness so complete you can hear the sea outside, a low rushing sound. as if the ocean itself is listening. Then the older man speaks close to the young one's ear. "If you want warmth," he says, very softly, "earn it in daylight. Don't buy it with all our lives." No shouting, no dramatic punishment, just the weight of that sentence, heavier than any blanket. The young sailor nods, trembling, not from cold now, but from the sudden understanding of consequences. The hands release him. Someone passes the word down the row. Quiet reassurance, like smoothing a wrinkle in fabric. It's out. It's gone. Sleep. And slowly, the gun deck returns to its rhythm. Hammocks sway less wildly. Blankets are retucked. Breaths lengthen again. The ship, patient and indifferent, continues to creak and roll, as if it has seen this 1,000 times, as if it knows human beings will always test the edges of rules when they are tired. In the dark, the young sailor lies very still. He can taste the burned cord, bitter and faint. He can smell the sharp tang of fear, almost like metal. And then, because the body cannot stay in panic forever, he begins to breathe again. In, out, slower. The hammock takes him back. The sea keeps arguing outside, but the arguments begin to sound like lullabies again. And as the night deepens, as the cold continues its quiet work, another truth waits just ahead of us. Morning will come, and with it, the routines that keep a wooden world alive. The pumping, the scraping, the counting of supplies, and the slow, unavoidable fact that winter at sea is not a single night, but a season that repeats, watch after watch, until it finally lets you go. The next hours pass in the way they always pass at sea, not as a clean line, but as a slow tide. After that little flare of danger, the gun deck settles into a deeper hush. You can almost feel the way a shared body relaxes. A ship has its own nerves, and so does a crew. When fear rises, everything tightens. When the fear is smothered, the air loosens again, like a knot easing under patient fingers. Down here, in the dim space below the hatch, warmth is still a rumor. The only heat is what bodies make, what wool can keep, what close air can hold for a little while. The rest is cold timber, cold iron, and the steady, damp breath of the sea. If you were standing here with me, you would notice it in your lungs first. The air feels heavy, not thick in a dramatic way, just weighted, as if every breath has to pass through a veil. It tastes faintly of salt and metal, with a sour edge that you cannot name until you have lived with it long enough. That edge comes from below, from the bilge. The word itself sounds like something you would rather not touch, but it is simply the lowest place in the ship, the hidden trough where all water eventually tries to gather. Even the tightest wooden hull is not truly sealed. Oak planks meet oak planks with seams between, and those seams are packed with oakum, loose fibers hammered in with tools that ring like dull bells. Then tar, or pitch, is smeared over the work, dark as old candle smoke, sticky as a story you cannot shake. It helps. It slows the ocean. It does not stop it. Wood moves. It swells when it drinks moisture, shrinks when it dries. And out here, it rarely dries. The ship flexes with every wave. Joints work. Seams shift. A hairline gap becomes a thin path for water. And the sea takes that path without haste, a patient visitor arriving one droplet at a time. On calm nights, the seepage is gentle, almost polite. In heavy weather, it can be sharper, faster, more insistent. Either way, it ends up below, down in the dark, where nobody sleeps unless they have to. The bilge water is not clean water. It mixes with whatever falls through cracks in the deck, crumbs of biscuit, scraps of rope, dirt from boots, spilled brine from salted meat, the soft shed of old wool, the dust of 1,000 days. If a barrel leaks, the bilge drinks it. If a man is sick, the bilge is not spared. If rain finds its way down, it joins the same slow pool. All that becomes a smell. Not a single smell, really, but layers, like old paint on a wall. Tar is one layer, sharp and medicinal. Hemp rope is another, green and plant-like. Damp wool is another, earthy, animal, stubborn. Then there is the human layer, the warmth and sweat of bodies, living close in a world that cannot be properly washed, and under all of it, the bilge breath. It rises when the hatches are shut, and it lingers. It clings to canvas. It settles into hair. It makes itself part of the ship. The first time you meet it, it can shock you. After a week, your mind begins to file it away. After a month, you might only notice when it changes. That is how sailors survive. Honestly, they do not defeat discomfort. They teach their senses what to ignore. Still, on winter nights, the dampness remains hard to ignore. Cold air is one thing, wet cold is another. Water conducts heat far better than air. A damp sleeve against skin can steal warmth quietly and continuously. A blanket that feels only slightly wet can drain you over hours. Even your breath adds to the dampness. Each exhale is warm vapor. In a crowded gun deck, dozens of men breathing turns the air into a slow, invisible fog. That fog has nowhere to go when storms force the ship to seal itself. The warm, damp air rises until it touches the cold inner hull planks. Then it becomes water again. Droplets bead on the timber like sweat on a brow. They gather, swell, and finally let go. Drip, drip. Sometimes onto a cannon carriage, sometimes onto a coil of rope, sometimes onto the edge of a hammock. A man might wake to that soft, cold kiss on his cheek and not fully understand why his dream suddenly became a rainstorm. In a way, it is a rainstorm, just one that happens inside. The ship fights this as best it can, but the fight never ends. The men pump, they wipe, they scrape mold from corners. They shift stores so nothing sits against the hull too long. They recaulking seams when weather allows, hammering oakum into gaps with hands that ache, then smearing pitch until the air smells like a fresh wound of tar. It is maintenance as prayer. It is also maintenance as survival. The bilge pump is the ship's heartbeat, and it is not a metaphor down here. You hear it, yes, that clank and gurgle, but you also feel it in small vibrations that travel through wood into the souls of sleeping men. Each stroke is a reminder. Water is always entering, and someone must always remove it. On some ships, pumping is a scheduled duty, like sweeping the deck or trimming sails. On others, in winter storms, pumping becomes constant. Men rotate through the labor, shoulders straining, palms blistering, breath steaming in the cold air near the pump handle. Water is heavy. Lifting it is slow punishment. But the sound, the steady rhythm, becomes strangely comforting, predictable, reliable. A metronome that says, "We are still winning." What is unsettling is silence. Silence can mean the bilge is low, which is good, or it can mean the pump is jammed, clogged with debris, which is terrible. Experienced sailors listen for changes in the pump's voice, the way a person listens to their own chest when they are sick. A squeal can mean leather seals are failing. A grinding can mean a piece of wood is caught. A sudden stop in bad weather can wake men faster than a shout. Tonight, the pump continues. That is why the gun deck can return to sleep. The young sailor, the one who tried to steal a little flame, lies very still now. He has tucked the flint and steel deep away, maybe even thrown the cord aside. He does not want to feel it against his palm. He does not want the temptation near him. He listens instead. He learns the ship's sounds, because sound is information at sea. The creak of beams above, slow and low. The soft slap of water against hull planks. A rhythm that shifts with swell and wind. The occasional tiny tink of ice breaking free from rigging above and falling somewhere out of sight, like a brittle bead. The pump, steady, and the human sounds, a sigh, a whispered curse, a snore that rises and falls like small waves. These sounds form a kind of museum hush, the quiet you find in old stone halls, where every footstep feels too loud. Except here, the hall moves, the exhibits sway, and the air smells of salt and tar instead of dust and polished wood. You know that feeling when you walk through a museum and see artifacts behind glass, and suddenly you become aware of time as something heavy? That is what the gun deck does to a man. The cannons are like relics, cold and silent, waiting for a future you hope will not arrive. The ropes are like veins. The tarred seams are like scars. Everything is old and used, and constantly being repaired so it can keep floating. And floating is the only goal. Above deck, the ship is a boundary between sea and sky. Below deck, it is a boundary between the living and the cold that wants to claim them. That boundary is not absolute. It is negotiated each hour. A man's bedding is part of that negotiation. Wool matters here in a way that feels almost sacred. Linen shirts might sit against the skin because linen can take sweat, but linen alone does not keep warmth in damp cold. Wool does. It holds air inside its crimped fibers. It can absorb moisture without collapsing completely. It can be wet and still offer a stubborn resistance to the cold. The men know this without any need for scientific words. They know it because the ones who wrapped themselves in wool woke up. The ones who did not, sometimes did not. Pirates and sailors alike learn the same lesson. Scratchy wool is better than soft cloth that turns into a cold rag. So the gun deck becomes a quilted world of wool layers. Stockings, breeches, jackets, waistcoats if a man has one, caps pulled down over ears, scarves wrapped around necks, then the mattress a flock in the hammock, then the coverlet, then, if he can afford it, a spare jacket laid across the belly, or a second blanket borrowed and returned in mourning. And around all that, the warmth of other bodies. This is the quiet catastrophe of winter ships. You cannot escape people. Crowding is not just a social fact, it is thermal strategy. 50 men breathing and sleeping in one space produce heat like a row of lamps. It is not enough to make it comfortable. It is enough to make it survivable. Yet the crowding has its own darkness. It brings sickness. It brings smells. It brings the constant awareness that you are never alone. Not truly, not even in sleep. A cough can pass from hammock to hammock like a whispered secret. Lice can travel. Mold can bloom. Privacy becomes a small dream you forget how to want. Some men cope by shrinking their minds. They focus only on the hammock, the canvas edge, the patch on the blanket, the rhythm of the ship. Others cope by becoming storytellers. In low voices, before sleep fully takes them, they speak of ports and women and storms and strange fish seen in dark water. Not loud tales, just murmurs, fragments, bits of human warmth offered like a coal you can hold without flame. Tonight, those murmurs fade quickly. The near disaster has left a thin film of caution over the room. Men want sleep, yes, but they also want stillness. Stillness means less motion, less cold air pumping in and out of blankets, less chance of bumping a neighbor and sending a line of swaying through the hammocks. Stillness is warmth. So the gun deck becomes almost motionless. The hammocks continue their slow pendulum swing, but inside them, bodies settle into curled shapes, knees drawn in, chins tucked, hands hidden. A man might press his forehead into the edge of his coverlet, breathing through wool, tasting its damp animal earth. He might count the pump strokes without meaning to, letting the rhythm pull him down. Clank, gurgle, clank, gurgle. It becomes easy, after a while, to believe the ship has always been like this, that it will always be like this, that winter is endless. But morning will come. With morning comes work. With work comes sweat. With sweat comes damp wool. The cycle repeats, slow and patient, like waves. And tomorrow night, the men will descend again into this wooden world that cannot be warmed, only endured. As the young sailor finally drifts deeper, his mind catches on one last thought, soft and heavy. If fire is forbidden, if warmth must be kept by other means, then every small object becomes important. A blanket's weight, a seam's tightness, a pump's rhythm, a neighbor's breath. And somewhere ahead, in the next stretch of night, we will follow those objects more closely. The hammock itself, the way it was borrowed from distant shores, the way it turns violent motion into gentle rocking, and how that rocking becomes the only lullaby a winter ship can offer. If you listen carefully, you can separate the sounds into layers. The nearest layer is your own body, a sleeve shifting, a slow swallow, the quiet reminder that you are still here. Then the hammock, canvas creasing, rope fibers rubbing a hook, a knot tightening and loosening as the ship rolls. On a crowded deck, those whispers overlap until they become a steady hush. Above that, the structure. Deck beams speak in long groans. Planks answer with shorter creaks. Somewhere forward, a block taps, tap, tap. A small, impatient sound that, after enough nights, fades into the ship's normal voice. And beneath all of it, water. Even when you cannot see it, you hear it. In calm seas, it is a gentle slap and slosh. In rougher water, it becomes louder, more irregular. In winter, it adds a brittle music, ice loosening from rigging, frost cracking on rope. The sea is outside, but the sea is also under the floorboards in the bilge, rolling with the ship. That is a strange thought to fall asleep with, that you are suspended above a hidden pool that moves when you move. Still, the men accept it, because acceptance is lighter than fear. The dangerous thing is not the constant hardship. The dangerous thing is the change. A new leak, a wrong scent, a sudden break in the pump's rhythm. Sailors learn to notice those changes without fully waking. Their bodies do it for them. So the deepest rest comes only when exhaustion finally drapes over that listening part like a heavy wool coverlet, pressing it down, telling it, just for a few hours, let go. In that near black, the cold cannons are only shapes. The ropes are only shadows. The men are only quiet weight in swinging cocoons. The pump continues its patient beat. The ship continues its patient flex. Time stretches, slow, like a winter river moving under ice. And you can understand, softly, why so many sailors spoke of the sea with both love and dread. It gives you this strange peace, built inside discomfort, a calm carved out of danger, not because the danger is gone, because you cannot hold it in your hands all night. So you let it drift out into the dark, like a breath. By now, the night has settled into that deep middle hour, when even thoughts feel heavier. The gun deck is mostly asleep, but the ship is not. The ship never sleeps. It only changes the kind of work it is doing. In daylight, it strains against wind and rope and human command. At night, it strains against the sea in quieter ways, flexing, groaning, holding itself together in the dark, like a person clenching their teeth through a long fever. And the men, hanging in rows, drift inside the only bed that makes sense out here, the hammock. It is easy to take it for granted, because once you have seen a ship's gun deck at night, you cannot imagine it any other way. Canvas cocoons, each one a small, moving world. But the hammock was not born in Europe. Sailors learned it from people who had lived for generations in warm places where sleeping off the ground meant safety from insects, damp soil, and creeping things. Columbus wrote about seeing them, these suspended beds, and the idea traveled across oceans the way so many ideas do, quietly, without ceremony, simply because it worked. Before hammocks became common, sailors slept wherever they could, on the deck between coils of rope, against the mast, below deck on planks that were never fully dry, among cargo that could shift if the sea turned rough. It was miserable. It was dangerous. It was, in a slow way, a kind of neglect. Then someone noticed what the hammock offered: stability, A ship rolls. Even in calm water, it rolls a little, the gentle sway of an animal breathing. In heavy seas, it can roll in sharp, sickening arcs. A fixed bed does not forgive that motion. A man lying on planks can be thrown, jolted, bruised. He wakes again and again as his body fights the movement. But a hammock swings. This is the simple mercy of a pendulum. The points where the hammock is tied may move with the ship, but the bed itself tends to keep its own rhythm. It does not fight the roll in the same blunt way a hard deck does. It answers it. It swings with it. The motion becomes smoother, more predictable. The ship's violence is translated into something gentler, something you can eventually accept, honestly. There is something almost unfair about how comforting that can be. You would think motion would keep a person alert. Yet the right kind of motion, steady and repeating, tells the body that it can stop bracing, stop preparing for impact. Even now, if you lie in a place that rocks softly, a train seat, a cradle, a boat on a lake, you may feel it. That loosening, that surrender. Sailors did not need research papers to know it. They felt it in their bones. The hammock also lifts a man above the deck, and that matters more than comfort. The deck, down here, is not clean the way a floor at home is clean. People sweep, yes, and they swab, but life at sea is constant mess. Damp wood, drips of condensation, mud on boots, grease from gun carriages, the faint residue that comes from barrels and bodies and time. Elevation is separation. It keeps a sleeper away from the coldest air that settles low, and away from whatever moisture pools along seams. It is a small height, a few feet, but out here, a few feet can be the difference between waking chilled and waking dangerously cold. Then there is the matter of space. A warship can hold hundreds of men. A pirate vessel, smaller, still holds more bodies than it has any right to. Fixed bunks would take up the deck permanently, and the gun deck cannot afford permanent furniture. Those cannons need room, not because a battle is guaranteed, but because the possibility is always there, shadowing the ship like weather. So each evening, the gun deck becomes a dormitory. Each morning, it becomes a workspace again. You can picture the routine, even if you have never lived it. The day's work ends, or at least slows. The last light drains from the hatch. Men come below with stiff fingers and damp hair. They reach into nettings and lockers where their rolled hammocks are stored. Each bundle is tight, the canvas wrapped and tied like a loaf of bread. Navy rules insist on neatness. Even pirates, who claim to hate rules, learn quickly that loose gear is danger. A ship punishes untidiness. A man carries his hammock bundle through narrow passages, shoulders brushing rope, the smell of tar thick in the air. He finds his assigned hooks. He knows them by memory. In this darkness, he knows his place the way you know your own doorstep in the dark. His fingers find the iron hook. Cold. He loops the rope. He checks the knot by feel. He does the same on the other side. Then he unrolls the canvas, and it falls open with a soft sigh. The fabric is stiff from salt and damp. It remembers the shape of his body. All around him, other men do the same. A sudden forest of hammocks appears where an open deck had been. The air changes. Canvas absorbs sound. Voices become muffled. The gun deck becomes quieter not because people stop speaking, but because the fabric swallows sharp edges. Then comes the careful part. Getting into a hammock is not like getting into a bed. If you climb in badly, the hammock will twist. It will try to roll you out. A new sailor can end up on the deck in a humiliating heap, bruised and furious, while older hands snort softly in the dark. The lesson is simple. Enter low. Keep your weight centered. Do not fight the swing. Let it find you. So a sailor grips the canvas edge, steps in sideways, lowers himself slowly. The hammock responds, tipping slightly, then swinging back. He draws one leg in, then the other. He settles. The canvas wraps around his hips and shoulders. That cocoon effect takes hold. The world narrows. Now he arranges his bedding. The mattress, stuffed with flock, is heavy even when dry. In winter it is rarely dry. He pulls it into place, smoothing it as best he can, so there are no thin spots where cold air can creep in from below. He lays his blanket, the coverlet, across his body. He tucks edges under himself, sealing warmth the way you seal a letter. Many keep their clothes on, not because it is pleasant, but because undressing means losing heat. It also means having to dress quickly if called. Watches rotate through the night. A man who sleeps might be woken to climb into freezing wind within minutes. Being dressed is readiness. In that sense, a hammock is never fully private. It is personal space, yes, but it is also a station, a place you occupy until the ship demands you again. Still, for many men, it is the closest thing to ownership they have. Naval rules sometimes define it, a small volume of space that belongs to one sailor, no matter how low his rank. In a world where everything is shared and ordered by hierarchy, having even a small patch of canvas that is yours matters. It becomes a kind of identity. Some men stitch initials into the edge. Some tie a small charm to the line, a bead, a scrap of wood, a knot shaped in a way they can recognize by touch. Pirates might do this even more, because their gear is often taken from other ships. Captured hammocks, improvised canvas, nothing matches. So a man marks his bedding the way you might mark a cup in a crowded house. There is a darker intimacy too, one that sailors rarely speak about when the lanterns are lit. If a man dies at sea, tradition says he is sewn into his own hammock for burial. The same canvas that held him in sleep holds him in death, and the sea receives him wrapped in the fabric that knows his shape. It is not meant to be frightening. It is meant to be simple, practical, a way of making the ship's limited world complete. Sleep and death both held by the same weave. That thought can feel heavy. Let it be heavy for a moment, then let it soften. Out here, so much is out of human control that rituals become a kind of gentle anchor. Back on the gun deck, in this living night, the hammock's motion becomes the real story. At first, a new sailor resists it. His body tries to brace as if it were on land. He grips the canvas edge. He tenses his stomach. He holds his breath when the ship rolls. This makes everything worse. The more he fights, the more awake he stays. The more he notices the cold. An older sailor might whisper advice, not unkindly, just tired. Lie diagonally. That is the trick. A hammock is a rectangle of fabric, but if you lie straight along its length, it wraps you too tightly and can tip. If you lie at an angle, your weight spreads. Your center of gravity lowers. The hammock becomes flatter. The cocoon becomes more stable. You can stay warm and still. So the man shifts, slowly, careful not to pump cold air into his blankets. He finds that diagonal position. He lets his knees bend. He tucks his hands into his jacket or under his armpits. He feels the movement under him. Now the ship rolls. The hammock swings in response, smooth and repeating, like a long breath. In calm weather, the motion is almost imperceptible, a few inches one way. A pause, then back. The sound of water against the hull is gentle, a soft percussion, and the hammock swing seems to match it. The mind begins to synchronize. Thoughts slow. The body stops arguing. In moderate seas, the hammock's arc widens. The swing becomes more pronounced. Still, it keeps a rhythm. The predictability is what matters. If you can predict, you can relax. If you can relax, you can sleep. In storms, the motion can become wild. The ship pitches. The hull shudders. Waves strike like fists. The hammock swings higher, faster. Yet even then, the canvas holds. The cocoon keeps the sleeper from being thrown out. Men who have lived long enough at sea can sleep through it, not because it is easy, but because their bodies have learned what is normal. What truly wakes them is not loudness, but wrongness, a change in pitch, a new creak, a thump of shifting cargo, a silence where the pump should be. So sleep at sea is never simple surrender. It is a truce with constant awareness, a soft agreement with the ship. I will rest, but I will listen. And listening becomes easier when the world gives you steady rhythms. The pumps clank below, the hulls creak, the waters slap, the rows of hammocks moving together, a shared pendulum, a kind of collective breathing. There is something eerie about that, if you think about it too much. Dozens of human bodies swaying in near darkness, each wrapped in damp wool, each trying to keep warmth while surrounded by cold iron guns. It is the darker truth of life aboard these ships. The ship does not care about comfort. It only cares about staying afloat. But there is gentleness inside that truth too, because the hammock turns a hostile environment into something the nervous system can tolerate, because the shared motion becomes a lullaby, because men, even rough men, learn to be careful with each other's sleep, to move softly, to whisper rather than shout, to keep lanterns shuttered, to tuck their own fear away so it does not spread. If you were here, you would feel it in the way footsteps change. A sailor crossing the deck at night steps with more care, placing his feet where he remembers the clear boards are, sliding between hammocks like someone moving through a room of sleeping children. His boots make small, dull sounds. The boards answer with faint creaks. The air parts around him, cool and damp, and closes again. He does not want to wake anyone, because waking someone means stealing their heat, their hard-earned warmth, their brief escape. And in winter, that is almost cruel. So the night continues, the hammock swinging, the ship speaking, the bilge being pumped, the cold held at bay not by fire, but by fabric, by physics, by discipline, by proximity. In the next part of our night, we will lean closer to the fabrics themselves, the wool layers, and the weight of bedding, and to the quiet rule that makes all of it work. Movement means cold, and stillness means survival. Back here, beside the fireplace, I picture it with a kind of slow awe. The candlelight in this room is warm, gentle, safe. The flame behaves. It stays where it belongs. Out there, on a winter ship, a flame is not a comfort, it is a threat. So the men build comfort out of everything that does not burn. Even the morning routine has that quiet logic. At first light, or at whatever passes for it beneath gray winter skies, a call goes through the decks. Hammocks down. Men emerge stiffly from their cocoons, faces creased by canvas, hair damp from condensation. The first breath outside the blanket feels like stepping into cold water. They do not linger. They roll the hammocks quickly, because the gun deck must return to work, and because order keeps a ship alive. The roll is practiced. Mattress, blanket, canvas, all folded into a tight bundle, then lashed with a line. Neat, compact, almost ceremonial. Those bundles are carried up and stuffed into nettings along the rail, stacked like pale bricks. In battle, those same rolled hammocks can catch a musket ball, soaking up violence the way they soak up damp. Even the things meant for sleep become armor. Nothing on a ship is allowed to have only one purpose. Then, as evening returns, the bundles come down again. The same fabric becomes bed once more. Work transforms into rest. Rest transforms into work. A cycle as steady as the pump. The night deepens again, and down on the gun deck, you can almost feel the ship exhale. The hammock has done its first kindness, turning the ship's rolling into a slower, gentler swing. Now the second kindness must come from something less elegant, less romantic, more stubborn. Fabric. Not pretty fabric. Not the kind you hang in a window to catch sunlight. This is working cloth, made for survival, heavy in the hand, smelling faintly of sheep and salt and long use. Wool. If you were sitting with me here by the fireplace, you might laugh softly at how dramatic that sounds. Wool. Just wool. A simple thing. Yet out there, In winter seas, wool becomes a kind of quiet miracle, not because it is warm like a fire, but because it refuses to become useless when everything is damp. That is the true enemy below deck. Not one single wave or one single storm, but the steady, endless moisture that turns every surface into a cold sponge. Linen can take sweat, yes. Cotton can feel gentle against the skin. But when those fibers drink water, they cling and they flatten and they stop trapping air. They turn into cold rags. Wool behaves differently. It still drinks moisture, sometimes a surprising amount, but it keeps little pockets of air held inside its crimped fibers. Those pockets, tiny and trapped, are where warmth hides. Sailors did not describe it like that. They did not need to. They simply knew that a wool jacket, even when it smelled of salt and felt heavy, still protected you, while a plant fiber shirt could betray you the moment dampness settled in. So you can imagine the men on this deck, each one slowly building a barrier between his body and the ship's cold, layer by layer. The first layer is often a shirt, linen more than wool, because it can pull moisture off the skin. Not perfectly, not in this air, but enough to help. Over that might be another shirt, if he owns one, and if he does not, he makes do. Then the wool begins. Stockings knitted from worsted yarn, thick enough to resist wear, long enough to cover from foot to knee. Breeches of heavier wool, ending near the knee, overlapping with the stockings so there is no gap where cold can slip in. A jacket, usually short, often double-breasted, the front panels able to overlap like a door closing against wind. If a man has a waistcoat, he wears it. If he has a scarf, he wraps it. If he has a wool cap, he pulls it down over ears that burn with cold. The head loses heat quickly, and sailors learn that lesson early. They do not speak of it scientifically. They speak of it through experience, through waking with a headache that feels like ice in the bones, through the relief of a cap that turns that ache into something bearable. And still, clothing is not enough, because a hammock, for all its comfort, has a cruel underside. It suspends you in air, and air can move. Cold air can flow beneath you, stealing warmth the way water steals it, just more slowly. A man can be wrapped above and still lose heat below, a quiet draining that leaves him waking with numb hips and a dull shiver he cannot stop. So the bedding matters, perhaps even more than the clothes. The mattress is not a soft luxury. It is insulation, a barrier. Naval rules, where they exist, speak of weight, because weight means thickness, and thickness means trapped air. A mattress stuffed with flock, those short wool fibers that cannot be spun, is heavy in the hands, and heavier when damp. Yet that heaviness is protection. You can picture a sailor pulling it into his hammock, hands slow from cold, fingers stiff, nails cracked. He spreads it so the filling is even. If the flock has shifted, as it often does, he kneads it through the casing, pushing it back where it belongs, like smoothing clay, like pressing damp earth into shape. That is one of those small moments that can take a long time on a winter night. The ship sways. The lantern light is faint, if there is any at all. He works by touch, feeling where the mattress is thin, where his body would compress it too much, where cold would creep in. He rubs the filling into place. He pauses. He listens to the pump. He continues. Above the mattress comes the coverlet, the blanket, also wool, also heavy. Its weight is not just warmth. It is a kind of pressure, a gentle holding down, like the comforting weight of a hand placed on your shoulder when you are too tired to speak. Many sailors pull the coverlet high, tucking it around the neck, then around the shoulders, then down along the sides. They create a seal, not perfect, but deliberate. Some even pull the wool over their heads, leaving only a small gap for air. It makes a little cave of breath inside the blanket. That cave quickly becomes warm, then humid. The air inside tastes of wool and salt, and the slow sweetness of sleep. Not everyone can tolerate it. Some feel trapped, some need more air. But on the coldest nights, when the deck seems to drink warmth through every plank, many choose the cave anyway. Pirates do the same when they can. The difference is supply. A navy has patterns and slop chests and standardized bundles of cloth. Pirates have capture, barter, and improvisation. One man might have a fine blanket taken from a merchant captain's cabin, too good for him, smelling faintly of soap. Another might have only his jacket and a strip of sailcloth. Senior hands claim the best. New hands take what is left. Hierarchy returns, even in a world that pretends it has none. And the blanket itself changes over time. Wool used at sea does not stay soft. It becomes felted, matted, stiffened by salt and dirt and moisture. It can grow scratchy. It can grow heavy. It can grow a smell that is almost alive. Wet wool has an earthy odor, animal and honest. And in a closed gun deck, it blends with everything else. Tar, hemp, bilge, human breath, iron. At first it is too much. Then the nose learns. The mind files it away as background. A sailor might even come to find it comforting, because it means home, as strange as that is. You know that feeling when a smell you once disliked becomes familiar, and familiarity turns into safety? It happens quietly, without permission. There is another practical advantage. One sailors may not say out loud, but they sense it. Wool does not burn easily. It resists flame. In a world where fire is forbidden, that matters. A stray spark from a lantern, a careless ember, would rather smolder in wool than leap. Still, no one trusts it. No one wants any spark at all. The law is not softened by fabric, so the men rely on wool as their shield against cold, and they accept the damp as an unavoidable companion. Dampness creeps in everywhere. A man works on deck, hauling rope, bracing against wind, and he sweats inside his layers. Sweat feels warm for a moment, then it cools, and the damp clings. He comes below, and the air is humid, so nothing dries. His jacket stays heavy, his stockings stay slightly wet, his blanket absorbs the moisture of his breath. Even when the sea is calm, the ship is a breathing machine. It takes in moisture, holds it, releases it slowly as condensation. Droplets form on the hull timbers. They slide down. They find the edges of bedding. They soak into seams. The mattress grows heavier by ounces, then by pounds. That added weight is a burden when morning comes. A wet mattress is hard to roll. It resists your hands. It feels reluctant, like it does not want to leave the warmth of a body. Yet it must be rolled, because the deck must clear, because the ship demands it. So sailors learn to keep their bedding as dry as possible, even while accepting that it will never be dry. On the rare days when the sun shows its face and the wind is steady, bedding is aired. Hammocks are brought on deck and draped over lines. Blankets are spread in rigging. Men turn them, shake them, slap them to loosen moisture. Steam might rise from the fabric in cold sun, a faint ghost of warmth escaping. It is not enough. It helps. Then the sky closes again, and everything returns below, where the damp waits patiently. That patience can feel like a curse, a slow spell cast by the ocean itself. No matter how carefully you fold, no matter how neatly you stow, no matter how disciplined you are, moisture finds you. So men develop smaller tricks. They sleep with hands tucked into armpits, using body heat to keep fingers from stiffening. They wear extra stockings on hands like improvised mittens. They place spare clothing over the belly, where warmth begins. They curl, knees drawn up, reducing the surface area exposed to cold. They breathe slowly, not because they are practicing meditation, but because slow breathing feels less like pouring warmth out into the air. And they learn, each in his own quiet way, that warmth is not created, it is conserved. The ship does not give it. The sea does not give it. Only the body gives it, and wool tries to hold it, and the hammock tries to keep it from being stolen too quickly. If you listen, you can hear the whole system working. The pump below, the ship's heartbeat. The creak of beams, the ship's bones. The hush of blankets shifting, the soft rasp of wool against canvas. The tiny sigh of a man pulling the coverlet tighter, sealing the last gap. And under all that, the water sounds, the ocean, speaking through wood. It is strange, and a little haunting, how domestic it becomes. Not cozy, not comfortable, but familiar. A household built out of necessities. A bedroom made out of cannons, and rope and tar and damp cloth. In the small hours, a sailor might half wake and smell his own sleeve, damp wool warmed by his skin, and for a moment that smell might seem like a living thing, like a companion curled beside him. He might drift back down with that thought, not even fully forming words, just accepting the presence. Outside, the cold continues. Inside, the men hold their small warmth close, and soon, as the hours move, we will look at where that warmth gathers and where it leaks away. Because even on one deck, the ship has its own map of cold, its own geography, written in hull planks and iron and drafts. For now, the blanket settles, the hammock swings, the pump keeps time. The night keeps moving forward, quietly, as if it does not want to disturb anyone. Honestly, I've always found it strange that the few surviving regulations speak of warmth in numbers, as if comfort could be weighed like cargo. 11 pounds of flock, 6 pounds of coverlet. Not poetry, just minimums. But you can feel why those numbers mattered the moment you lift the bedding. A thin blanket is easy to roll and easy to stow, and it is just as easy for cold air to slip through. A heavy coverlet drapes. It settles into the curve of the body. It presses down gently, closing little gaps where warmth would leak away. The mattress, too, is less a cushion than a wall. Dense flock interrupts the cold airflow under the hammock, turning a fast draft into something slower, something you can live with. So a sailor guards his bedding, the way he guards his knife. On naval ships there is the slop chest, that floating store where clothing and blankets can be bought on credit, the cost later pulled from pay that never feels quite enough. Pirates have their own version, made from capture and bargaining. Among rum and coin and weapons, cloth is always prized. Blankets, coats, spare canvas, even a strip of sail becomes treasure when it can be folded under your hips and keep the night from draining you. Watch the evening ritual and you see how much of sleep is craft. The bundle is untied, canvas unfurls with a soft snap. The mattress slumps into the hammock's curve, heavy and damp and stubborn. Fingers knead the filling through the casing, smoothing thin spots by touch, because lantern light is rare and eyes are tired. Then the coverlet follows, folded and refolded, edges worn soft. It is pulled high, tucked close, arranged with the same care someone might use to seal a door against a storm. Sometimes a droplet of condensation lets go from a beam above and lands on a cheek, one cold bead. A man wipes it away, shifts only a fraction, then goes still again, choosing warmth over comfort, stillness over fuss. The ship keeps creaking. The pump keeps time. Wool keeps holding what little heat the body can spare. And as the wind fingers the rigging somewhere overhead, that faint music threads down into the wooden world, guiding the sleepers deeper, one slow breath at a time. If you stay with him a little longer, you notice the tiny sounds inside the bedding. The whisper of wool fibers when he exhales, the soft creak of canvas taking his weight, the minute click of a knot settling into place. These are not loud things, but they become a private choir in the dark, and the mind, craving something steady, begins to follow them. The ship moves. The hammock answers. The blanket presses down like a calm reminder. You are here. You are held. You can let go. Somewhere in the middle of the night, The ship teaches another lesson, not through words, of course, through sensation. You can be wrapped in wool, tucked into a hammock, covered with a heavy blanket, and still find a cold spot that feels sharper than the rest, as if the night has placed an icy fingertip on your ribs and refuses to lift it. That is the ship's hidden map. Even inside the same gun deck, not every place is the same. Cold has its own geography. It flows, settles, concentrates. It chooses corners. It collects near certain surfaces. It sneaks through certain seams. And the men, without drawing charts, learn where those places are. If you were standing here with me, you would notice it in how sailors choose their spots when choice is possible. Closer to the center is slightly better, a little farther from the hull, a little more surrounded by other bodies, a little less exposed to the cold radiating off wet oak that is in constant contact with winter seawater. Near the hull, the wood is a heat sink. It does not look threatening. It is just planking, dark with age, shining faintly where condensation beads, yet it is chilled from the outside, pressed by water that can be barely above freezing. That cold travels inward. A man hanging his hammock too close to the hull will feel it, not as a sudden bite, but as a steady, draining, like leaning against a cold stone wall for too long. Then there are the cannons. Iron behaves differently than wood. Iron conducts heat efficiently, and in winter it becomes a silent thief. A cannon on the gun deck is a massive cold presence. Even when it is not touched, your body radiates warmth toward it, and the iron accepts that warmth without changing its expression. Touch it by accident, and the shock is immediate. A sting that wakes you fully, a reminder to keep skin covered. Most hammock positions, by necessity, are between guns. You cannot avoid them. The guns define the deck's architecture. Sleep takes place among weapons, and the irony is quiet and constant. A space made for violence becomes a space for rest, and the men must negotiate with iron as part of their bedtime routine. Drafts matter too. Hatches and companionways are not perfectly sealed. Even when battened down, wood swells and shrinks, and tiny gaps allow air to move. Cold air seeps through and settles low. A hammock hung near a hatch can feel different. The air around it seems to move, even when you cannot see it. That movement destroys the warm little layer that blankets try to keep. A sailor might wake and pull the coverlet tighter, not because he is thinking about convection, but because he feels the stealing. There is a vertical map as well. Warm air rises, cold air settles. If hammocks are hung in tiers, the upper hammocks are slightly warmer, borrowing from the upward drift of body heat. Lower hammocks sit closer to the cold floor and the faint breath of bilge below. The difference might be only a degree or two, but on a winter night, a degree can feel like a gift. Officers know this map too, even if they pretend not to. Their cabins, small and enclosed, have partitions that trap warmth better than an open gun deck. Being above the lowest spaces, being farther from the bilge, being surrounded by walls, all of it creates a little advantage. It is not warmth like a hearth. It is simply less cold. So the ship's hierarchy becomes a thermal hierarchy, whether anyone admits it or not. Pirates, who speak of equality, often reproduce the same pattern. The captain and the favored hands take the best spots. The newest men sleep where there is room, near drafts, near the hull, near the iron. The sea does not care about fairness. The ship does not care. It only offers what its shape allows. And yet, there is one great equalizer: body heat. In the absence of fire, the crew becomes the furnace. Each human body, resting, produces warmth like a small lamp. One lamp alone cannot heat a room, not in winter, not in damp wood, but many lamps together change the air. 50 men create a subtle shift. 100 men create more. The gun deck, sealed against storm, becomes an enclosed space where warmth cannot escape easily. It accumulates, slowly, and lifts the temperature a few degrees above what the cold hull would create. This is not comfort. This is survival. You can imagine it like a faint tide of warmth rising among the hammocks, pooling where bodies are closest. Where the hammocks hang with only inches between them, the air is shared. A man's warmth does not belong entirely to him. It leaks outward, and his neighbor's warmth leaks back. Their heat spheres overlap. Their breath adds humidity, yes, but it also softens the cold air's harshness. There is a darker side to that closeness. Disease travels, parasites thrive, privacy vanishes. Yet on the coldest nights, no one argues with the furnace. No one demands space for comfort. Space is cold. So the gun deck becomes a woven mass of sleeping bodies, each one contributing to the only warmth that exists. Even the sound of breathing becomes part of it. The soft rise and fall, dozens of lungs moving, a collective rhythm that can feel almost like one creature. The hammocks swing together. The ship rolls. The crew's breath becomes a kind of weather inside the ship. If you listen closely, you might hear it as a river, a low, steady flow of exhale and inhale, warm vapor moving upward, touching cold beams, turning to droplets, falling again. That is the ship's winter cycle in miniature. Warmth rises, moisture forms, cold returns, and in that cycle, stillness becomes the final strategy. Because movement means cold, a sailor learns it quickly. The first time he shifts too much, turning, kicking, scratching, the blanket lifts, warm air escapes, cold air rushes in, and his body has to spend energy rebuilding the warmth. In a place where energy is rationed by exhaustion and limited food, wasting heat is costly. So men choose positions they can hold. They lie diagonally. They curl slightly. They tuck hands where they will not need to move them. They arrange the coverlet carefully before sleep, smoothing it, pressing it down, sealing edges. They do it with the slow focus of someone building a shelter out of cloth. Then they try not to disturb it. You know that feeling when you finally get comfortable and the thought of shifting even a little feels like a risk? Multiply that by cold. Multiply it by damp. Multiply it by the knowledge that if you get up, you will have to rewarm everything from the beginning. Some men even drink less in the hour before sleep, not out of discipline, but out of avoidance. Getting up to relieve yourself means leaving the hammock, stepping into colder air, feeling the deck under bare feet or thin shoes, and then trying to climb back into the canvas cocoon without waking neighbors. The social pressure is quiet, but real. Disturbing another man's hammock is like stealing his warmth. So you move only when necessary. You stay still. You endure small discomforts. An itch becomes something you ignore. A cramped knee becomes something you accept. Stillness is not passive. It is work. The hammock helps with that work. Its unstable swing discourages thrashing. Its cocoon shape limits how far you can roll. It encourages a kind of contained posture. In a strange way, the hammock trains the body to rest with fewer movements, as if the ship itself is teaching you how to conserve. There are nights, especially in heavy weather, when the watch system breaks this stillness. Men are called up. Boots scrape. Ropes creak. Cold air rushes as bodies leave their heat pockets. For a moment, those left behind feel a draft, a sudden emptiness where a warm neighbor had been. Then the gap slowly fills again. Warmth returns. The furnace continues, slightly weakened, then strengthened again when the watch returns and climbs back into the forest of canvas. And always, beneath the deck, the pump continues its rhythm, reminding everyone that water is still entering, that the ship is still negotiating with the sea. Clank, gurgle, clank. It becomes a lullaby the way a ticking clock becomes a lullaby. Not because it is soothing by nature, but because it is steady. And steadiness tells the nervous system that nothing sudden is happening, that the world is continuing in its expected pattern. Silence, again, is what alarms. So the men sleep in a world where danger is constant but predictable. Cold is constant. Damp is constant. Motion is constant. Sound is constant. They rest inside constants. And that is why, over time, the mind becomes able to drift. The ship's voice becomes background. The bilge smell becomes background. The iron presence becomes background. The blanket becomes a small, private world. There is a moment, late in the night, when a sailor half wakes and hears the ship's creak change, a deeper groan as the hull flexes under a larger wave. His eyes may not even open. His body tenses slightly, then relaxes. He listens for the pump. It continues. He listens for a new, rushing sound of water where there should not be one. There is none. He lets the tension go. That is competence at sea. It happens even in sleep. The darker truth is that sailors do not rest because they feel safe. They rest because they learn to measure risk and then let go anyway, because they have to. Their bodies are too tired to hold fear forever. So fear becomes quiet, folded into the same bundle as the hammock in the morning, stored away until needed. And when dawn comes, the system resets. Hammocks down, bundles rolled, nettings filled. Men stand stiffly on the cold deck and pull their jackets tighter, and their breath rises like smoke, even though there is no fire. They have survived another winter night without flame, not by conquering cold, by cooperating with each other's heat, by trusting wool, by trusting the hammock, by trusting the pump's heartbeat, by mastering stillness. If you let that thought settle gently, it can feel almost calming, a strange calm, born in hardship, but calm all the same. The ship rocks on, the sea speaks on. The men, for a few hours, have found their rest inside a moving wooden world. There is another layer to this hidden map, and it is one you smell more than you feel. Air near the deck is heavier. It holds the ship's oldest breath. The bilge odor rises in slow waves, never quite leaving, even when the pumps have done their work. It mixes with damp wool, with tar that clings to rope, with the faint metallic note of iron. In the center of the gun deck, where bodies are packed, the smell becomes warmer, more human, softened by shared breath. Near the hull, it is sharper, colder, as if the ocean itself is leaning through the planks. New sailors notice every creak. They lie awake thinking each groan is a prophecy. Then, slowly, they learn the difference between the ship speaking and the ship crying out. Once the mind can name the sounds, it stops chasing them, and the rocking turns hypnotic instead of frightening. Morning begins to form long before light appears. You feel it as a slight loosening in the air. Men stir in small ripples. A cough, a sigh, the soft scrape of a boot on wood. Even waking is careful. You do not leap out of warmth. You emerge like a turtle from a shell, testing the air with a cheek, then a hand, then a foot. Then routine takes over. Hammocks come down. Bundles are rolled tight. Rope is wound. Knots are tied. The gun deck clears, turning from dormitory back into workspace, from hush back into labor. The place where you were held in sleep is erased each morning, as if it never existed, and the cold returns the instant you step out of that private cocoon. Soon, we will go deeper into what the lower decks truly smelled like, and how a sailor's nose learned to live with it, the way his ears learned the ship's voice. For now, let the rocking continue, gentle and steady, as if the sea itself is trying, for once, not to wake you. A rolled hammock, stowed in its netting, has its own quiet life. During battle, it might become a barrier against shot. During peace, it becomes a bundle of damp canvas and wool, pressed tight as a loaf of bread, waiting for evening. Sailors learn to roll it the same way every time, pulling corners in, smoothing, compressing, because the act itself is calming. Order in a world of waves. When the last bundle is tied, the deck feels suddenly larger and also colder, as if the sleeping bodies had been a curtain. Bare planks show their chill again. Iron shows its chill again. Someone stamps a foot, and the sound echoes differently now that the forest of hammocks is gone. Above, the watch calls. Below, the pump keeps its patient rhythm, and the ship, still moving, still creaking, carries the crew into the next set of hours, until evening returns and the canvas walls rise again. The ship keeps moving, even when you cannot see it. Down on the gun deck, where night and day trade places without much ceremony, you begin to realize that winter at sea has its own signature. Not a flag, not a song, not a captain's speech. A signature that settles into your clothes and hair and the back of your throat. Smell. It is strange how quickly scent can become a map, a memory, a warning, a kind of weather. And honestly, I have always found it unsettling that the most common descriptions from old accounts do not focus on storms first or hunger first, but on the atmosphere itself, the air, the way it felt to breathe. If you were standing here with me, close enough to hear the soft crackle of our fireplace, and I asked you to imagine the gun deck of a wooden ship in winter, you might picture darkness and hammocks and cold iron. You might even hear the pump and the creak. But smell is harder to picture until it is there, surrounding you. It arrives as layers, like clothing. The sharp medicinal tang of tar and pitch comes first. Tar is everywhere, soaked into rope, smeared into seams, brushed onto wood as protection. It is meant to keep water out, to preserve, to hold the ship together. Yet tar has a way of announcing itself, especially when the air is damp and enclosed. It bites the nose a little. It feels as if it wants to clean something. It makes you blink. Then there is hemp, miles of rope, and rope has its own smell, a dry plant scent that becomes heavier when wet. Hemp rope that has been used and reused and dragged through salt spray loses its clean dryness and turns into something darker, a scent like soil after rain, like a sack left too long in a cellar. It is not one smell, but a range of them, depending on whether the rope is fresh, tarred, fraying, or newly coiled. And beneath those, always beneath those, there is the bilge. They try not to speak about it too much, because to speak about it is to invite it into the mind, but it is there. The lowest space of the ship holds water that should not be there, and it holds everything that falls into that water. Bits of food, fragments of wood, spilled liquid, the small waste of bodies that cannot be fully kept away. The bilge is the ship's shadow, and its scent rises in slow patience. It is a complex odor, a sourness, a rot, a damp must, a sharp sting like old vinegar. Some accounts make it sound almost monstrous, but even that can be softened by time. When you live with a smell long enough, the brain begins to blur it, filing it into the category of normal, not pleasant, not welcome, just normal. And then there is wool. Wet wool carries its own truth. Earthy, animal, slightly sweet, slightly bitter. When dozens of men are wrapped in damp wool, and when their blankets and stockings and jackets are rarely fully dry, that wool odor becomes an entire layer of the ship's atmosphere. It mixes with sweat. It mixes with salt. It mixes with the faint smoke of lantern oil when a lantern is allowed, and with the smoky, waxy note of tallow when candles appear in privileged places. Human bodies add another layer. Men are living furnaces, and furnaces perspire. They work hard, then cool too fast, then sweat again. They wash rarely. Fresh water is for drinking. Salt water leaves salt behind, and salt draws moisture, and moisture draws discomfort. So skin becomes its own fabric, holding oil and sweat and the smell of long days. At first, a newcomer might feel overwhelmed, nausea even, a sense that the air itself is thick, coated, but there is a quiet, almost eerie adaptability in people. Within days, within weeks, the nose adjusts. The tar fades into background. The bilge becomes a low note you notice only when it changes. The wool becomes your own scent. That is when smell becomes information. A sudden sharpness of smoke where there should be none, that would jolt a man upright faster than any shout. A change in the bilge odor might mean rising water, spoiled provisions, or something dead where it should not be. A sweet, strong note of rum might mean a broken cask. The scent of mold might mean stored cloth is being eaten by dampened time. Some sailors learn this so well that they do not think about it. Their bodies respond before their minds do. They wake, sniff, listen, and go still again if everything is normal. On a winter night with hatches closed, the smell intensifies. That is the hardest part, not because each odor becomes new, but because there is no relief. The air circulates only in small, lazy currents, pushed by the ship's motion and by the rise of warm breath. Moisture accumulates, breath accumulates. The gun deck becomes its own little world, sealed, swaying, breathing. You can picture a man lying in his hammock, coverlet tucked high, and his breath warming the small space near his face. Each exhale adds humidity. That humidity drifts upward until it meets cold beams and cold planks. Condensation forms. Droplets gather. They fall, sometimes onto fabric, sometimes onto skin. A cold bead on the forehead can feel like a whisper from the ship itself, reminding you that you are inside a living structure that is always exchanging heat and water with the sea. On calmer days, when gun ports can be cracked open and a hatch can be lifted, the first rush of fresh air is like medicine. The wind sweeps through, and for a moment you can smell the outside. Salt, cold, the clean sharpness of sea spray, sometimes the faint green smell of distant land. If land is near, that fresh air feels so bright it almost stings. Men inhale more deeply without realizing it. Shoulders loosen. Even the ship seems to breathe easier. But the relief never lasts. The ship's signature returns as soon as the hatches close again. Pirate vessels often smell worse. Not always, but often. Smaller ships mean less volume of air and less separation between spaces. Maintenance may be rougher. Pumps may be worn. Bilge may be more neglected. The smell becomes stronger in the same way a small room with too many people becomes thicker than a large hall. Naval ships, for all their strictness, sometimes manage slightly better ventilation when weather allows, and sometimes enforce cleaning routines with harsh discipline. Yet the sea is still the sea. Damp is still damp. The smell is still the smell. It becomes part of identity. A sailor steps ashore after months at sea and enters a tavern, and suddenly the air smells wrong. Too dry, too sweet, too full of smoke that is not tar. His clothes carry the ship with him, and people on land can smell it. They might wrinkle their noses. He might not notice at all. There is a darker, quieter thought beneath this, and it sits like a pebble in the shoe of the mind. The ship does not let you forget that you are inside it. Every breath you take is filtered through timber, rope, wool, and the sea itself. The boundary between the ocean and the crew is thin. A few inches of oak, a layer of pitch, some oakum pounded into seams. That is all that keeps the water outside from becoming the water inside. The bilge smell is proof that the sea is already partly within the ship, patient and persistent. And still, men sleep. They sleep because the body demands it, because exhaustion is heavier than odor, because the hammock swings, and the pump keeps time, and the mind, given enough repetition, learns to accept even the strangest atmosphere as normal. So imagine the gun deck in the deep hours, when voices have faded and most hammocks hold still bodies. The air is damp. It tastes faintly of salt and tar. It carries the low bilge note. It carries wool. It carries breath. Lantern light, if present, is a small, weak star behind canvas walls. The ship's creak is steady. The water sounds are steady. The pump, perhaps, is steady. And in that steadiness, the smell becomes like a blanket too. Not a pleasant one, perhaps, but a familiar one. a presence that stops being questioned. If you let yourself drift with that thought, it can feel oddly calming, the way a storm feels less frightening once you accept that it will pass whether you worry or not. The ship's atmosphere cannot be improved by wishing. It can only be endured by adapting. A sailor adapts by breathing through his nose, slowly, letting the air warm before it reaches the lungs. He adapts by pulling the coverlet up, creating a small pocket of air that belongs to him. He adapts by letting the larger smells exist outside that pocket, somewhere beyond the edge of his blanket, as if the hammock is a small room within a room. And when morning comes, and hammocks are rolled and stowed, and the deck clears, the smell changes again, not because the ship is cleaner, but because human bodies are moving. Fresh sweat rises. Tar becomes sharper as hands work rope. The bilge is masked by activity. The ship shifts from sleeping smell to working smell. It is all one world, just viewed from different angles. Soon, we will listen again to the ship's full voice, the creaks and pumps, and water and rigging, and we will allow that voice to become our lullaby rather than our warning. For now, stay here in the dimness. Let the air be what it is. Let the hammock rock you, and let the night keep moving forward, quietly, as if it is careful not to wake the sea. There is a small moment I like to linger on, because it shows how scent becomes a kind of lantern. Picture a man waking in the middle of the night, not fully awake, not fully asleep. The hammock sways, and for a second he does not know where he is, only that he is moving. He inhales. Tar tells him he is below deck. Wet wool tells him he is among other bodies. The bilge tells him he is still afloat, still in that wooden bargain with the sea. A faint thread of tobacco, if someone has been allowed a pipe earlier, tells him the last watch was relaxed, at least for a while. And that knowledge, strange as it sounds, settles him. Sometimes he needs to get up. He listens first. The pump, the water against the hull, the low conversation of timbers. Nothing sharp, nothing wrong. Then he tries to move without disturbing the warm air inside his bedding. The coverlet lifts slowly, and cold slips in at the edges. He swings one leg over the hammock's side, feeling for the deck with the toe of his shoe. The deck smells different than the air above, closer to damp wood, closer to iron. He avoids touching metal. Everyone learns that lesson. He threads through a narrow passage between hammocks. Canvas brushes his shoulder. Ropes creak softly. Someone coughs, a low sound swallowed by wool. Even with almost no light, he knows where he is by scent. Near the companionway, the air is a touch fresher, a touch colder, carrying a hint of outside wind sneaking through seams. Near the storeroom, a musty grain smell rises, biscuit and dried peas, the faint, dusty sweetness of flour in barrels. If the ship carries onions, there is a bitter green bite that cuts through everything else. And if he passes the galley, even cold and dark, the air remembers it, a ghost of smoke embedded in wood, a faint greasy note that lingers in corners. It is like walking past a long extinguished fire and sensing, with quiet comfort, that warmth once existed here and might exist again when weather allows. When a storm has forced everything closed for too long, even the air feels tired. Men speak less. They conserve breath. The smell of breath itself becomes noticeable as a thickness, warmth trying to exist in a cold place, creating humidity that cannot escape. Condensation beads on beams, and the ship sweats slowly, dropping cold beads back onto blankets and shoulders. That is when small acts matter. A sailor might press his face into the edge of his coverlet and breathe the wool. It is not clean, but it is familiar. He might imagine, for a moment, the sharp, clean smell of land. Then let the image dissolve, because longing can keep you awake. Better to accept the ship, the way you accept rain against a roof when you cannot stop the storm. And sometimes a different scent appears, and everyone notices. A hint of smoke, faint and wrong. It does not belong. It could be nothing. A lantern trimmed poorly, a careless ember. It could be something. The thought alone tightens throats. Fire is the one horror that is never softened aboard a wooden ship. Most of the time, the scent fades. A correction made, a rule enforced, a danger brushed away before it can speak. After that, the ordinary smells feel almost gentle by comparison. Tar, bilge, wool, sweat, unpleasant, but steady, survivable, and steadiness, in the end, is what lets sleep arrive. The older I get, the more I notice how the mind chooses a single sound to hold on to. Sometimes it is rain on a window. Sometimes it is a fan turning in the corner. Sometimes it is a clock that you swear is loud until you stop fighting it, and then it becomes almost kind. On a winter ship, that chosen sound is often the ship itself. Not one creak, not one groan, but the whole voice of timber under pressure, the way a living body speaks when it is working. The hull flexes, the joints answer, the ropes tighten and relax. Water slides along planks and then falls away again, and the whole vessel keeps whispering its condition into the dark. If you have never slept with that kind of constant dialogue around you, it might sound impossible. Too much movement, too much noise, too much damp, too much cold, too much smell. And yet, the darkest truth of this story is also the softest. They did sleep. Not because the ship became gentle, but because the human body can fold itself into survival, the way a hand folds around warmth. The men did not conquer winter. They negotiated with it hour by hour, by learning what could not be changed and then adjusting everything else in small, quiet ways. You can feel the rhythm of it now if you let the scene continue. The hammocks are up. The gun deck is crowded. Rows of canvas hang like pale walls in a dim cavern. Cannons sit in the shadows, iron cold enough to drink heat from the air. The deck beams above are heavy, dark, holding everything, holding everyone. Somewhere deeper, bilge water shifts with the roll, making that hidden slosh that reminds you the sea is not only outside. Somewhere a pump clanks, or has clanked earlier, leaving a kind of phantom rhythm in the ears. The smell is thick, tar, wool, breath, the ship's own damp wood. And then there is the motion. It is the easiest thing to forget when you sit on land. We imagine sleep as stillness, but these men slept in a world that never stopped moving. The ship pitches and rolls. The hammock responds. A slow swing one way, a pause, a return, sometimes wider, sometimes barely there, depending on the sea. You know that feeling when you are almost asleep in a moving car, and the road hum becomes a blanket, and your thoughts begin to loosen their grip? It is a little like that, only steadier and deeper, and shared by dozens of bodies at once. The hammock turns motion into something predictable. The inner ear stops protesting. The mind stops trying to measure it. And the cold becomes a geography rather than an enemy. Near the hull, colder. Near the hatches, drafty. Near the center of the deck, a little less severe. In the upper air, slightly warmer. In the lowest air, colder again. The difference is small, but on a night that lasts forever, small differences matter. Men learn where the cold bites hardest, and they learn how to place themselves inside their own defenses. That defense begins with wool, stockings that hold warmth even when damp, breeches and jackets that trap air in their rough fibers, a cap pulled down over ears, a scarf or cloth wrapped where it can protect the neck, a shirt underneath, often linen, absorbing moisture that would otherwise cling to skin. Then the bedding, the flock mattress in the hammock, dense with wool fibers, heavy enough to block the cold air that would otherwise circulate beneath the body. The coverlet above, thick and weighty, settling around shoulders and hips like a hand. The coverlet is not only insulation, it is pressure, it is reassurance. It tells the nervous system that it can rest. If you listen closely, you can almost hear the small rituals repeating across the deck. A man tucking an edge of blanket under his side to seal out drafts. A man turning just slightly, diagonally in the hammock, to let the canvas wrap him better. A man pulling the coverlet up to his chin, then hesitating, then pulling it a little higher, creating a small breathing opening like a cave mouth. A man sliding his hands under his armpits for warmth, then deciding he can bear the awkwardness if it means his fingers will not ache. These are tiny choices, but they add up. A winter night on a ship is built from tiny choices. And then there is the most uncomfortable, most necessary choice of all: stillness. Movement pumps warm air out of bedding. Movement invites cold in. Movement makes the hammock swing too wide, makes ropes creak, makes neighbors shift. So the men learn to settle and remain. They learn to accept a less than perfect position, because changing it costs more warmth than it gains in comfort. It is not heroic, it is practical. It is the quiet discipline of staying alive. If you imagine the gun deck at its calmest, it resembles a museum at midnight, a hush that feels thick as if it has weight. Rows of hammocks swaying almost together, a slow tide of canvas, breathing sounds, low and steady, like waves in miniature, an occasional creak as a beam answers a change in pressure, the faint drip of condensation falling from a cold plank. Even the darkest parts of the ship, the bilge, the smell, the cold iron, become less frightening when they repeat. Repetition turns dread into routine, and routine, if it does not break you, can become a kind of lullaby. Some scholars argue that rocking motion helps the brain slide into deeper sleep. Others simply note what sailors already knew without words. The body can get used to almost anything, given time and exhaustion and the promise of morning. And there is always that promise. Morning means hammocks down, bundles rolled, stored in netting, the deck cleared for work. Morning means movement and noise, the smell shifting from sleeping smell to working smell. Morning means cold fingers flexing again, boots finding grip, voices returning in short sentences. The men do not wake refreshed, not in the way we mean it now. They wake still cold, still damp, still tired, but they wake alive. And that matters more than comfort. It is tempting, from a distance, to romanticize it. The creaking ship, the brave sailor, the wild pirate. But if you stay close to the truth, the story becomes quieter and sadder and oddly more human. These were men living inside a wooden machine that could not be warmed, only endured. They were surrounded by materials that could burn in minutes, so they gave up fire and accepted cold. They were surrounded by water that could swallow them, so they listened to pumps and learned to trust rhythm. They were surrounded by damp that could rot cloth and lungs and rope, so they chose wool and layers and crowded proximity and the stubborn choice to keep breathing. That is the tragedy hidden inside the routine. A ship at sea is an agreement with the elements, and the price of the agreement is paid every night in the way bodies curl and minds let go. But this is also where the calm lives, because once you see the system clearly, you can feel the steadiness inside it. Hammock, wool, layers, bodies close together, sharing the only warmth they are allowed. The pump's heartbeat when it is needed, the hull's voice, constant and honest, the ocean's breath on the other side of planks. It is all a kind of dark choreography, slow and persistent, repeating until the ship reaches port or does not. If you let your attention soften, you can take what is soothing from it and leave the rest. You can take the rhythm of the hammock, that gentle swing that asks nothing of you. You can take the steady sound of water, the way it arrives and retreats like a long exhale. You can take the idea of stillness as a gift rather than a constraint. One more detail before you drift, because it is one of those quiet things that changes the whole picture. In the absence of fire, the sailors themselves become the heat source. It sounds almost poetic, but it is simply biology. Each resting body gives off warmth, a steady output like a small lamp. One man alone cannot warm a gun deck, but 50 men, 60 men, packed close enough that their hanging cocoons nearly touch, that is something else. Their warmth overlaps. Their breathing warms the air. The enclosed space holds a few degrees more than it would otherwise. Not enough to call it comfortable, but enough to tilt the balance away from danger. You can imagine the air between hammocks as a shared lake of heat, shallow, fragile, easily disturbed. When someone climbs out, even quietly, a gap opens in that lake. Cold air slips into the space where a warm body was. Neighboring sleepers feel it as a brief draft, a cold finger that vanishes once the gap is filled again, either by another body returning or by the slow work of everyone else's warmth. That is why the night is organized the way it is. Watches rotate, boots cross the deck, men go up into the biting wind, then come down carrying salt on their sleeves and a little extra damp in their clothes. They climb into hammocks still warm from exertion, but the warmth does not last. Sweat cools, fabric clings. A man learns to settle quickly, to trap what heat he has before it leaks away. And the ship keeps teaching the same lesson. Stillness is warmth. The hammock itself encourages it, because the moment you twist too much, the canvas tries to roll, and you risk spilling out into cold air. So you find that diagonal posture, and you keep it. You curl slightly. You let the coverlet fall into place. You breathe slowly so the air inside your little pocket stays warm. Even dreams adapt. Some men dream of floating, of flying, of drifting down corridors that sway. The mind takes the motion in the inner ear and turns it into images. A strange mercy, really, that the brain can translate discomfort into something soft and unreal. The soundscape does the same. At first, creaks can feel ominous, like the ship is complaining, like it might split. But a seasoned sailor hears those creaks as normal speech, the way you hear a house settle in winter and do not panic. The truly frightening thing is not noise. It is a change in noise, a silence where a pump should be, a new scrape where there should be none, a different pitch in the hull's groan that suggests stress in a place you do not want stress. So the men sleep in layers of awareness, not fully alert, not fully defenseless. A part of the mind keeps one ear open, trained by repetition, ready to wake if the ship speaks in an unfamiliar tone. It is a thin, constant tension beneath rest, another quiet cost of life at sea. And yet, for all that, the nights still contain peace. There are hours when the sea is calm enough that the hull's voice becomes slow and deep, like a long animal breathing. There are hours when the water against the planks falls into a rhythm so regular that it might as well be a lullaby. There are hours when the hammocks swing only a few inches and everyone settles into the same shared motion, as if the ship is rocking a whole village to sleep. If you stay with that image, it becomes almost tender. A brutal world, softened by routine. A dangerous world, made survivable by wool and rope and the simple fact of bodies close together. A cold world, warmed slightly by the heat of living. And when morning finally comes, it does not arrive with trumpets. It arrives with small sounds. A cough, a footstep, a rope creak that has a different meaning because it is a man moving on purpose, not the ship moving by itself. A murmur, a command spoken low. Canvas rubbing as hammocks begin to be rolled. The day takes the deck back, piece by piece, the way the tide takes a shoreline. The night does not end sharply. It simply thins, just like your own wakefulness can thin now, melting into sleep without any hard edge. So let the story fade the way lantern light fades when a wick is lowered. Let the ship's sounds become distant. Let the cold become only an idea. Hold on to the gentle. Swing. Hold on to the steady breath. Hold on to the feeling that, even in the harshest places, the human mind can find a rhythm and rest inside it. And you can imagine, for a moment, that you are here with me again, by the fireplace, the room dim, candlelight trembling on the wall, dust motes turning lazily in the warm air, as if the world is underwater. We are not on the gun deck. We are safe on land. The cold sea is far away. The ship's smells are only ideas now, softened by distance. What remains is rhythm, breath, the feeling of being held by something steady. So let your jaw loosen, let your shoulders drop, let your breathing slow, not forced, just slower, as if you have all the time in the world. Inhale and feel the air warm as it enters. Exhale and imagine it sliding out like a tide, withdrawing from the shore. If thoughts come, let them pass like footsteps on a deck above you, distant, unimportant, already fading. And if you want an image to carry you, keep it simple. A row of hammocks, swaying gently in the dark, a low lantern glow behind canvas, a ship moving through winter water, patient, creaking, alive, the night holding everything in a careful hush. Good night.